we cast our net rather further afield now and return to the question of what on earth is going on between Russia and Ukraine, or more pertinently, between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. A popular Russian newspaper reports this morning that they are on a collision course. In fact, that's the phrase they use. A head-on collision seems unavoidable. You'll understand I'm reading it in translation because I don't, as Peter Cook might have said, I don't have the Russian to read Moskovsky Komsomolets in the original language. But the Trump locomotive and the Putin locomotive are speeding towards each other, and neither is about to turn off or stop and reverse. Anne Applebaum is a columnist for The Atlantic and a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University. She's also, as you know, because she came on this programme to talk about it, the author of Autocracy Inc. and a keen follower of these movements and these events. I mean, first of all, Anne, I suppose, how significant is it that this would be reported in Russia, where, of course, the media is far from free?
Well, the Russian media has been reporting hysterical things about Trump, both good and bad, since he was elected. I think the day of his election or the day after, they put naked photographs of Melania on television. Periodically, they threaten to use nuclear weapons. Sometimes they make fun of him. I mean, I'm not sure I would read too much into this one article, except that, maybe it's in somebody's interest in some part of the Russian administration to make it sound like there's some kind of conflict coming. And
how significant is the shift in tone from Donald Trump on Vladimir Putin? Because one of the few things you could say about him in the last administration and for much of the first few months in this administration was that he wouldn't do anything or say anything that was likely to upset Putin. And that is no longer the case, is it?
Well, it's a little bit odd because on the one hand, he's now saying some more inflammatory things. On the other hand, in practice, the U.S. has been slowly lifting sanctions because a sanctions regime requires that you continue to follow the way the money is going and the way trade is going. And the Trump administration hasn't been doing that. Trump administration has continued to put cuts on Russian independent media that used to be supported with U.S. money. There's still unclear relationships between the U.S. and Ukraine, and Trump doesn't make noises about supporting Ukraine fully to the end, to win the war and so on, the way Biden once did. So, he's also, I should say, he's given a lot of different deadlines. Actually, there's one this week. I think August the 8th was the latest deadline when there had to be some kind of decision. So I'm not sure.
It's supposed to end on day one, just to remind deadline fans. Yeah. That was the original claim.
Yeah. I mean, he keeps shifting around. So I'm not sure that from Moscow's point of view, this necessarily looks like anything that's all that different. I mean, right now, it still amounts to threats and language. There does seem to be some kind of business negotiations that are happening, and there are people around Trump who seem to want to do business deals with Moscow. And I hear a lot about it. I can't prove any of it. And so I don't want to name any names, but I know lots of people are trying to get to the bottom of that. And I'm sure that's going on. I think it may be that Trump has finally worked out that Putin isn't his friend or doesn't feel the same way about him that he feels about the Russian president, and maybe is beginning to understand that he looks pretty stupid, having made all these promises and promised to end the war so many times, and maybe that's a good thing. But I'm still at the stage of not wanting to read too much into it until I see the Trump administration doing something real, making real changes that really matter on the ground in the war to Ukrainians, and they haven't done that yet.
So in some ways, the two administrations, the Kremlin and the White House, are more similar to each other than they are to traditional Western models of government. I'm struck by Steve Rosenberg of the BBC used a phrase in his report this morning where talking about the US nuclear submarines that Trump was talking about earlier this week. And Steve uses the phrase claims he's repositioned closer to Russia. I don't think we'd have used the word claims with the previous American president.
Well, I don't know how much this has gotten play in Britain. Trump, in the last few days, fired a government statistician who gave him some numbers that he didn't like.
Just say that again, Anne, if you would, because it has had some coverage in Britain, but I still think some words deserve a little bit more emphasis than others.
So there was a statistician who produces statistics on the American labor market, And she produced numbers that the Trump administration, well, rather the President Trump actually, didn't like. And so he fired her. And, when you have a president doing that, then you have to ask, is this a president who wants us to know the truth? Does he want us to understand what's really happening? And of course, there's all kinds of doubt and question over what really happened after the Americans dropped bombs on Iran. There were some reports that said that not all the facilities were destroyed. And the president got very angry when those reports appeared, even though they seemed to come from reliable U.S. government sources. So, when you have a president who keeps pushing back against traditional government reliable sources of information, saying they're not true, then, of course, when he does do something like, say, he's sending nuclear submarines, then, I think it makes a lot of sense to say, well, we don't really know whether that's happened or not.
We're in the middle of a phone-in on very different territory, but the uniting theme is actually gaslighting. And I just wondered, Anne, on a personal level, how do you do what Orwell told us we all had to do at times like this? How do you hold on to the truth in your work and in your personal life?
I rely on people who I know, or reporters that I know, or sources that have been proven true to me in the past. In this area, Russia and Ukraine, I do know who almost all the people are. I would believe anything Steve Rosenberg wrote. At least I would know that he was trying to be accurate. Everybody makes mistakes, but I would also assume that Steve Rosenberg would tell us when he had made a major mistake. And I try and sort through the world that way. And in areas where I don't know the people and where I'm not sure, what's true, then I try not to have strong opinions. But you have to use experience. You have to watch who uses which sources, what is their goal in presenting information? Are they trying to express something real, or are they trying to produce propaganda? You have to look at people's attitudes as well as what they're saying.
And autocracy Inc., of course, reminds us what can happen when we lose sight of those tools and lose grip of those tactics. Finally, then, and off the back of what you've just said, what is the sort of current state of play with regards to a possible peace between Russia and America, between Russia and Ukraine? Because Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, is due in Moscow this week. Is there any cause for any optimism at all?
So far, the president of Russia has never said that he wanted to end the war. He has never said that he wants a ceasefire, and he has never walked back from his original goal, which is the destruction of Ukraine and of Ukrainian independence and the absorption of Ukraine into some kind of Russian empire or sphere of influence. So he hasn't done that yet. When he eventually someday does, or his successor does, when they finally are able to admit that the war was a mistake and that Ukraine is allowed to be an independent country, that's when we'll know that the war could be over or could be heading in that direction. And I do believe that will happen. I just don't know whether it's going to happen this summer or at some later date. It's not a war that Russia can fight indefinitely. They don't have an indefinite number of young men who are willing to die in order to make a little bit of extra money, and they don't have an infinite amount of resources. So it will happen. It would have happened faster if we'd had a U.S. administration that was willing to put much more pressure on Russia, and it would happen faster if Europe and Britain and the rest of the democratic world were also more united and were able to help Ukraine with greater speed. But so far, all I can say is that we don't have any indication that Putin's ready to end the war.
Anne Applebaum, thank you very much indeed. You're very much on my list of people that we can trust and who we should listen closely to on these matters. Columnist for The Atlantic and a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University, author as well of University Inc. It's coming up, Autocracy Inc. even.